William Backbone Covington from Shreveport, Louisiana. No one ever built an empire without blood, sweat, and a ruthless disregard for the weak. And no one embodied that truth more than Red, the man who carved a sugar dynasty out of the swamps of the Southland, turning sweet ambition into raw power. Born in 1863 to a struggling tobacco planter in Alabama, Covington learned early that survival favored the ruthless. He earned his nickname, Backbone, not for his moral character, but for his sheer, unbreakable will. Where others bent, he stood firm. Where others hesitated, he seized opportunity. By the time he was 16, he had fought and killed for his share of land. By 25, he was already on his way to becoming one of the wealthiest planters in the South. But it was not tobacco or cotton that made him a legend. It was a new gold at the time: sugar. In the late 1800s, while others were still obsessed with cotton, tobacco, or oil, Covington saw the future in sugar. He traveled to the West Indies, where he studied the brutal efficiency of the Caribbean sugar plantations. What he learned there changed everything. Sugar was not just a crop. It could be a necessity, like salt and pepper, not just a luxury that people craved. And it could be an industry that could outlast any economic downturn. By 1890, he had acquired thousands of acres along the Mississippi River in Louisiana, swampland that others had deemed unworkable. But Backbone didn't believe in the impossible. He drained the land, imported the finest cane from the Caribbean, and built the most sophisticated sugar refining operation the United States had ever seen. He was a large man at 6 feet 3 inches and 325 pounds, and became both feared and respected. Covington was not just a planter. He was a strategist, a businessman, and, when necessary, a tyrant. He ruled his land with an iron grip, driving his work.
So now I'm going to go to the story about the other guy, J.G. Boswell. So I'm putting that together. And of course, you guys must know I'm a Libra. Since I got the scale and balances on, you know I'm a Libra. So I'm gonna put it on this other. But so on one of these days, say a day that looks like this outside. Well, bring down here. It looks like that outside. These stories will do for me. Everybody else at school, at work and stuff. Hope that everybody's all right. Some people are laying in bed. So.
If you're in the U.S., text quiz to 500-500. That's QUIZ to 500-500.
Audible Studios presents The King of California, J.G. Boswell and the Making of a Secret American Empire. Written by Max Erex and Rick Wartzman. Narrated by James Patrick Cronin. Part 1. Winter. Never seen no cotton like this here California cotton. Long fiber. Best damn cotton I ever seen. John Steinbeck, The Grapes of Wrath. Chapter 1. Winter. We had been chasing Jim Boswell for the better part of 2 years, trying to find the right words that might persuade him to talk. He was a man who had spent half his life safeguarding the family lore. He had once gone to the unusual lengths of hiring a Hollywood screenwriter to gather the stories of his mother and father and kin way back in Georgia. But the stories, covering a century, never saw the light of day. Boswell took the voices of his southern past and locked them away in the basement of his California headquarters, where they had been gathering dust for more than 20 years. Now, at age 76, he had no reason to break the tradition of secrecy that began with his uncle, Lieutenant Colonel J.G. Boswell, the founder of the company. The colonel created a culture around the idea that if you ever talked about it, you'd have to give up the game, one Boswell cousin recalled. At family gatherings, they talked about the virtue of stealth this way. As long as the whale never surfaces, it is never harpooned. We tried to convince Boswell that his tale was more than a family tale. We appealed to his sense of history and patrimony, to that piece of the quaint South that still seemed to survive in him, even though he had spent a lifetime conquering the West. None of it worked. Not our strokes to his vanity, nor the sheer persistence that his friends said would win him over. Not even the writer's little extortion. This book is going to be written without you, and the voices of your critics will echo only louder. His response was to slam the door shut. We finally decided to appeal to his mortality. A sales pitch he cut short like this: "You don't seem to understand. It won't bother me in the least if I die and this story is never told." So it came as some surprise when one day we found ourselves sitting right beside him in a beat-up Chevy truck, his hand with the missing fingers guiding the wheel, barreling straight into the forgotten middle of California. We had met him that morning. "Be here at 5:30, and don't forget your pencils to take down all my lies," in the small farm town of Corcoran, where his land and memories crisscrossed in the clay bottoms of an old lake. It sat in the County of Kings, on the western flank of the San Joaquin Valley, a land pinched by mountains and rolled out flat and never-ending. We drove for miles and miles across immaculate fields where he had hunted Indian arrowheads as a kid, and then he mercifully stopped to let us take a stretch. We had come to rest on a giant earthen levee, a feat of engineering akin to something in Holland, and he stood on the dusty dike and gazed out across the empire he had snatched from a great inland sea. It was late winter, a few weeks before planting, and everything before him was open earth. Mammoth machines clawed and leveled the land, and crop dusters with their jet engines wide open plowed through the sky. Every square and treeless stretch of it was his. But even as he stood in the bright sunlight, it was hard reading pride in his face. He had a way of keeping even longtime friends and his children guessing. Something always held back in the pale blue eyes and thin-lipped smile. The same Boswell face stared out from the portraits of his Scottish forebears, slaveholders and gentlemen farmers who had been chased out of Georgia by the boll weevil in the 1920s and grafted a piece of their cotton plantation onto this immense land. They had brought the South its mint juleps, its chow-chow relish, its tar paper cotton picker shacks out west. He wore a Cal Poly Ag cap tucked low, khaki pants, a flannel shirt and Rockport shoes, not exactly the slop of a farmer about to get dirty with his land, and not exactly the outfit of the absentee corporate landlord that his critics accused him of being. His voice, like the irrigated fields that ran past him to the horizon, hardly rose or fell an inch. And yet, he had made it perfectly clear since the first cup of coffee that morning that he didn't appreciate our line of questions, didn't enjoy this exercise of show and tell. He was here under protest, agreeing to talk only after we let it drop that the old-timers of Corcoran were portraying his long-dead father as the town drunk, a man who could pound 9 straight beers without going to the bathroom, and still had more sense besotted than a lot of guys do cold sober. Keeping us straight with certain facts about his father, his drunkenness was explained away by family members as a means of numbing the misery of hemorrhoids, was one thing. Entertaining questions about the size of his farming operation and wealth was quite another. "What are you, a tax collector?" he said, shooting down our question of how much land he really owned. In a tone of half-lecture, he explained, "I abhor the word empire. It's a word for nations, for civilizations. Why do you guys have to get into this whole damn big thing anyway?" At some point that afternoon, it occurred to us that we had traveled half a day, a distance of some 150 miles, and we had never left his farm. Our route, a slight zigzag across the old lake bottom, took in but half of it. We visited the first cotton patch of his father and uncle, and the farm where his brother, Billy, an even harder drinker than his dad, died before his time. We passed the long-gone tent cities of black sharecroppers from Oklahoma and Arkansas, Texas, Louisiana, Georgia, and Mississippi, who had migrated not north to Chicago or Detroit in the 1940s, but followed the Cotton Trail west to the gut of California. We crossed the levees built by the boom and bust pioneers through 80 years of reclamation and flood, each dike a little higher than the next to keep the floodwaters on their neighbors' land. And then we passed the faded camps of Mexican migrants and white dust bowlers who journeyed to the San Joaquin Valley for no better reason than they knew how to chop and pick cotton. Each turn of land raised another ghost. That was all Rowan, and right behind us it was Flynn. Just to the north it was Chatham, and north of that was Schwartz, he said, rattling off the old farmers and the giant sections of land named for them. He had pointed to a Boswell crew raising the levee along the left bank of the Tule River. Now, if you still had all the original owners over on the right side, they'd be panicking today to see us building up that levee. Why? Because when the big flood hits, the water's going to come their way? That's right, Boswell said. So why isn't anyone panicking now? We own it all. We had driven the equivalent of Washington to Philadelphia, though it seemed pointless to measure it that way, and nearly every road, field, and irrigation canal belonged to Boswell, and every worker we passed and waved to was his worker, and every truck, tractor, and leveler for which he politely moved to the side of the road bore the same Diamond B logo. The goofy grin on a few of their faces made you wonder if they even knew who the old guy waving at them was. He was the biggest farmer in America and the last land baron of California, and he saw no good in playing it up. His 200,000 acres in the middle of the state, just part of his domain, may have ranked as one of the biggest land grabs in the modern West. But, to hear him tell it, the product of guile and vision it was not. A chance encounter here, and a little seller's desperation there, and presto, tens of thousands of acres just fell into his lap. The fact that he had built the most highly industrialized cotton operation in the world, and had grown more irrigated wheat, safflower, and seed alfalfa than any single farmer in the country, and was aiming to do the same with onions and tomatoes, well, the fewer people who knew about that, the better. It was not by accident that Boswell had changed a 200-year-old American institution, altered the way cotton was grown, picked, ginned, and marketed, and hardly anyone outside Kings County knew his name. James Griffin Boswell II, call me Jim, had taken a cue from his uncle, the family patriarch, who founded the company from the back of a jitney in 1921, and then married into one of California's most powerful and polished clans, the Chandlers of Los Angeles. Colonel Boswell was a little martinet of a boss who liked to tease his wife, the willful Ruth Chandler, that the men in her family, land developers and publishers of the Los Angeles Times, were soft and weak and not half the man he was. The colonel had no children by Ruth or his first wife, a beautiful and brooding poet who died young, but on long voyages to sell Boswell cotton